An asset management professional plays a vital role in maximizing the value and performance of an organization's assets throughout their life cycle. They combine strategic planning, data-driven decision-making, and operational oversight to ensure assets are acquired, maintained, and retired efficiently. By evaluating risk, optimizing costs, and aligning asset strategies with organizational goals, they help improve reliability, reduce downtime, and enhance long-term financial sustainability. Their work often bridges multiple teams, finance, operations, and maintenance, making strong communication and analytical skills essential. Ultimately, an asset management professional ensures that every asset delivers optimal value and supports the organization's mission. In today's episode of AE Live, I'll be speaking with Ryan Woodhouse from our Calgary office about some interesting tales from his asset management journey. Before we get into that, though, I want to note that Associated will be celebrating its 80th anniversary in 2026. We're proud of the long history that the company's had serving Canadians, and as you can imagine, 80 has been on our minds of late. This is the first episode of Season 3, which means a new take on the podcast theme. And we hope you enjoy our little homage to the 80s pop sound this time around.
Coming to you on computer audio, STEM colleagues know is where you gotta go when your car listening to the Graham and Michael show. It's a whole new interview, bro. Treat your ears, get the gist of careers from the list of our engineers and scientists, and maybe twist it up with technologists. It's a podcast, baby, and not to be missed. Got more fly than a ripe banana, like a salmon got the stamina streaming across Canada. Like a trade sugar banner got the swiggity swag, yeah, and the inside scoop from my host tonight.
Hey, live. You know we're going to innovate. Hey, live. Going to entertain and educate. Hey, live. Got a topic here to elevate. Hey, live.
To talk more about asset management and the challenges of smart planning for the future, I'm joined by Ryan Woodhouse. Ryan is an asset management professional working with our Strategic Advisory Services group in Calgary. Thanks for joining me today, Ryan, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Ryan, you are a certified engineering technologist and a member of the Institute of Asset Management, as well as having a diploma in civil technology from SAIT. That's the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology.
That's right.
Remembering it? Yeah. And a business management degree from Athabasca University. So 15 years into your career now, you're an asset management professional. So tell me about some of the key moments that brought you to this point. Did young Ryan playing on the schoolyard dream of this as his future?
I don't think I knew about asset management as a thing, but I definitely knew I wanted to get into sort of civil and public service. I worked for the city of Calgary for many years, and just sort of found my way into asset management. But it's always been sort of the challenges I liked. It's problem solving, and you're trying to optimize things. There's lots of gray areas. There's not always a right or wrong answer. And I sort of like dealing with those kinds of challenging problems.
So when you got to that inflection point where I guess there was this realization that expertise was needed. Did you get sent off to like a course? Like, how does someone get into this?
It's interesting. So yeah, there are courses out there. In Canada, it's definitely becoming a little bit more of a more recognized practice, but it's still pretty light in terms of training. So I'm a member of the Institute of Asset Management, so I took a training course, got a certificate through them. That's like a UK-based organization that can certify people. There's only about 127 members in Canada of that, so it's a pretty, like I said, a new practice still so far. So yeah, I did some training in that. Most organizations as well too when they do this journey, so the City of Calgary was no different, set up kind of like a core group of champions, and so you at least have a network of colleagues that are struggling in the same thing. And so learning a lot from, those colleagues and those great connections that I made there as well too. And, you kind of make your way through it together. One person, one group kind of starts to do something really well, and you all learn from that, and you're excellent in another area, so other people want to learn from that, and you share your knowledge around as well too. So that kind of, I felt that was unique. A lot of organizations are kind of siloed and you don't get that chance, and this is almost the opposite of it. It works so well because you were working with so many people and you could apply practices and ideas from one discipline and apply them in another area and figure out how to make it work. And that always seemed very sort of creative and exciting to me.
So do you get the sense that that is kind of the case, I guess, on a national scale? Like the UK has the certifying body. So are they at the forefront of this field? Is Europe?
Yeah, you've got a few areas. So Europe, specifically the UK, and kind of the water industry started to feel some pressure when it came to their assets were aging, they were having maintenance and reliability issues, and they started to go down this asset management journey a few decades ago. Conversely, Australia and New Zealand sort of felt the same things with their public infrastructure. They were faced with a massive deficit and some infrastructure gaps that they just couldn't manage well. They were providing, they were seeing service levels declining as well too. And so they went down this road sort of separately around the same time frame to develop better asset management. And the US as well in certain areas, especially transportation, saw that they were having some issues with their networks and with their assets. And so these three areas sort of pioneered formalizing this thing we now call asset management. You started seeing some like PAS 55, which is a public specification out of the UK, sort of actually document what we're talking about with asset management. That went on to become the ISO standard, ISO 55000, and the suite of standards as well there too. So you've seen it being led in those areas, but certainly a lot of other countries around the world are starting to catch up, and Canada especially is starting to catch up. In Ontario, we now have regulations in Ontario that mandate that municipalities should have asset management plans and do asset management. So they've got that in place. In BC and Alberta, we're probably the next provinces along. I don't think we'll see legislation here, but it's certainly in terms of figuring out this practice and really starting to see it in asset owning organizations. Definitely Alberta and BC are provinces that are a little ahead of the rest of the country as well too.
So the moral impetus for progressing this isn't coming from the federal government, really. That's at a provincial jurisdiction level.
I'd actually say it's not really an impetus from levels of government. It's really organizations feeling pressures, probably a financial pressure is the number one, but pressures with conflicting priorities, conflicting objectives, conflicting visions, and a constrained environment. And I think those constraints are getting harder to deal with, and there's more objectives that organizations are faced to try to achieve. And that's a hard environment to manage in. Like, it's a hard thing when you're in an organization, when you're trying to make a decision about where you invest and where you spend time and your money. And asset management, doesn't solve those problems, but it gives you a clear way of understanding how your investment decisions can impact one thing or another. It can give you maybe more options than you thought you had if you're a decision maker. And I think it can help you in that kind of world. And at a minimum, you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you're thinking about, well, how do I manage risks? How do I see my risks? How do I link my things, my assets, to some lofty vision that my council or my board or whomever has? Asset management's got that kind of framework in place already, and it's got a process that you can start to follow to do that.
So that being the case, can you give our listeners kind of a quick primer on what your job entails? What can AE or you as an asset management professional offer a client?
And I think this is kind of the unique one as well too, because there's almost two sorts of work that we can do here at Associated and that the strategic advisory team here works in. So there's what I think a lot of people, the first touch points they have in asset management are things like condition assessments. So we can go out, you assess existing assets, figure out what condition they're in, look for deficiencies and issues with those assets, start to come up with renewal plans over maybe a 20-year period of when you're going to need capital investments. That's kind of most people's first foray into them. We work in sort of maintenance and operations planning as well too. So similar thing, we can start to look at what's a maintenance plan for an asset, how much is it going to cost you as an organization to maintain something at a certain level? Are there benefits between, less capital, more operating, or vice versa? So what sort of things can you do? Can you optimize your expenditure between those two? So that kind of condition and short-term capital, long-term capital planning, that's sort of our, the main touch point most people think about with asset management. We'll do sort of, risk assessments, obviously. So we'll go in and help an organization assess what risks face their assets and what risks they have to service, and what they can go do about those things. We'll look at levels of service. So what's an organization, what's a municipality actually trying to do for their citizens? And so helping them map those and actually document them, and then figure out how to go measure them to figure out if you're actually doing a good job or not. Which is quite challenging. Data. So everyone's struggling with asset data. Lots of organizations have some sort of asset management technology, I'll say. A lot of folks call it a system. Systems are broader, but they have some sort of program or database or something that they may have purchased or built. Maybe they don't know exactly how to use it. Maybe there's not very good data in it. And so helping on those things. That's kind of one tier of actually doing asset management, but the really exciting projects that I think we all get excited about doing, and I certainly love doing, are more transformational projects with organizations. So we're actually going and helping build competence in their employees, building practices and processes that the organization can start to follow, building tools and templates that they can use to enable them to do better asset management themselves.
Oh yeah, so I was when you were saying getting that data in, the first question that pops into my head is, okay, so I'm an organization that has 50 trucks or something. Is it you that's actually going out there and looking at that truck and going, oh, that's a bad truck. Oh, that truck's pretty new. Or pump station or factory or whatever,
road and bridge or whatever. So yeah, certainly we do those kinds of projects where we go out and we look at the assets and we give organizations data, but we also get I think it's a lucky opportunity to help organizations figure out how to do it themselves when they can do it themselves as well too. And lots will always rely on outside organizations, but I often tell people this, and I tell clients this when we meet too, is like, hey, you've hired us and we're going to write you an asset management plan. But if we've done a good job, the least valuable thing we're going to deliver to you is the asset management plan. The valuable thing is, as an organization, you will have figured out how to plan. You will have figured out where this information comes from and who you talk to and who knows about risks and what that risk means and how that affects this over here. You will have learned that going through this process. And so this plan is great, but as soon as something changes, it's wrong now and it sits there and collects dust. But we've left that organization with a little bit better ability to actually do planning themselves. And that's kind of the transformational change that I think we get the unique opportunity to work with clients on.
So they'll know when the plan you gave them isn't serving their needs.
Exactly.
They can rewrite a new one.
They can rewrite a new one. They can tweak it, or they at least know that they need to go out and do another one, or what the effect is, at least, even if it isn't the right thing.
So when you have these early conversations with a client, I suppose one of the first questions might be, what happens if we do nothing?
Yeah, we certainly get that. Sometimes there's different hesitations as well, too, that you get from clients. And, there's a lot of hesitation sometimes to doing this. What happens if you do nothing? And ironically, do nothing is sometimes a really great strategy for your assets as well, too, right? Like when you see what your risks are and you can see what your services you're trying to provide and the levels are, you might actually not need to do as much investing as you think you need to do, or you might be different than you think what it is today. And so, you have the opportunity to do nothing. But in truth, every organization that owns at least one thing is already doing asset management. It's just a question of how intentional do you want that to be, how sort of process-driven and clear and documented do you want it to be or not. Often one of the first things we do with clients is we'll do kind of an asset management needs assessment or a maturity assessment, sometimes we might call it. We go in and we actually just look at what they're doing already, and pretty much universally 90% of asset management is already getting done at an organization. They just don't see it all happening and they don't recognize it. The other part is, when you look at something like ISO, you rank these things on a 0 to 4 scale. Often organizations don't go for a 4 being the best, right? They don't even often go for a 3. So often targeting kind of the middle of the road maturity at a 2 is more than sufficient for what an organization needs. So it's, should you do nothing? In some areas, maybe that's appropriate, right? In other areas, you should probably do something, but it might not have to be the sort of the top of the line, over the top practice and something that's going to be out of reach for you. It could be appropriate to what your needs are. So, we definitely encourage people to do that, because I don't think I've seen an organization where, you've gone down this road and there hasn't been some benefit to doing, right? And often it's just a better understanding of what your infrastructure investment needs are going to be. So you're not relying on an individual who's been there forever, who has it in their head. You're actually relying more on data and something that's systematic. You can forecast risks before they happen a little bit better and see things that might be happening. And so, I don't know of a case where it's been, a do nothing is the best opportunity when it comes to doing asset management. We've had other organizations that often maybe are even concerned, hey, if we do this, we're going to be airing all of our dirty laundry, is probably more of the more common concern, right? Hey, if we write down all of our risks and we look at how much infrastructure investment needs we need, my counsel's going to come back, they're going to look at this and they're going to assume we've done a bad job. They're going to look at these big numbers of investment we need to do and think we've done a poor job up to now, or that we have a lot of risks and that we've done a bad job. And so we see sometimes too, there's a hesitance because it looks bad. But again, I'd say, well, that's what it is today anyway, right? So closing your eyes to that doesn't actually make it go away. It just means you're not as prepared for it as you would be as well too. So
that's the next counsel's problem.
Yeah, exactly. So, kicking the can down the road or ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. Starting to understand it, getting some process in place about how to manage it at a minimum is going to give you more assurance that, hey, you are on top of those risks. You are seeing them coming when, so-and-so retires or leaves or wins the lottery. All this knowledge about your assets don't just walk right out the door. Other people can jump in and start to take over. So
what do you find brings a client to your door then? Is it that the organization has that thing in the back of their head tickling, like, oh, when Bob leaves, things are going to be bad?
Yeah, you definitely see that. And again, you see that it's rarely probably one thing that sends an organization our way, right? But you get a lot of that. You look at people and they see, man, we've got people leaving, or we've got a new council and they're maybe a little bit tighter on spending and they need to see more rigor applied here. We just don't know what we're doing, or, we can't afford all these things. So you get organizations that are just feeling the weight of all these pressures. And they need some help to figure out, how do you move forward in this, right? So how do you make a decision? How do you start to prioritize? And that's when they look at this to hopefully help. We are starting to see some, some funding mechanisms. Some grants have a requirement for an asset management plan attached to them. Okay. So sometimes if an organization reaches out and, hey, we need some of these things, so we better go this way. We have, it is becoming more of a practice. Here in Alberta, you sort of have large municipalities sort of do these programs and talk about the benefits of them. And then you see smaller municipalities, well, yeah, actually, that sounds like there's some benefits there. So maybe we should get on board with those things as well, too. So you definitely see it happening that way as well, too. Sometimes you'll get some asset management champions who may go on council and start asking questions about it. Often you get sort of contributors and leads and coordinators and managers in organizations that see it, right? They move from an organization that does asset management well, they move to an organization and go, holy smokes, we should get something sorted. And so it's starting to propagate that way as well too, with just people moving in the industry as well.
Right. So we talk at AE, we have it as part of our mandate that discussions about climate change have to be a part of every project that we undertake. And we want to bring that kind of knowledge, that awareness to our clients. So how would you say that the work you do, the planning processes you engage in, are affected by that? How do you present that to the typical client?
Yeah, so I think, we're fortunate because in strategic advisory services here, we're asset management. We're also the resilience and sustainability. We're the climate folks as well too. And so we work a lot in both. I think what we're also seeing a little bit is there's a bit of a trend to talk about both of them together and sort of maybe break down some of those silos in between climate and asset management as well too. So that's kind of an exciting trend we're seeing. So I think we're fortunate in that, if asset management is about achieving organizational objectives and managing risks, climate change fits right into those broad mandates already. So a lot of the times people are open to it. We certainly see some clients that maybe have some hesitancies around them. I think sort of the climate change mitigation more so if you don't, for whatever reason, if you might not see as an organization value in going down that route, we do see some hesitancy there. I think sometimes you have organizations that maybe push back. But on the other side of it, the climate change sort of the resilience side of this, the adaptation side of it, there's evidence and ample proof now that things are happening, right? So it's actually, whether or not you think it's happening or what's going to happen in the future, you're already exposed to these hazards today. And the frequency of those is changing, again, regardless of anything else that you may hold true. So managing those risks and figuring out, hey, in your assets, what do you do here? How can you make these more resilient to things? That's, a pretty key factor in what we're already trying to do. And so it can sometimes be an easier way to start to talk about some of that. I know for our practice, we will always talk about those risks and always start to include them. And we might not make them, front and center if there's some hesitancies but we certainly include that kind of work as well too. On the mitigation sides, you can always look at it too from a operating dollar savings, right? So it might not be as comprehensive, but you can always tackle it at least from an energy efficiency point of view, use less utilities, save an organization some money, and that can get you part of the way to some of that climate mitigation work, even if there's some hesitancies there with people. I think often we rarely run into, a group of people that's 100% against it, but there's some organizational sensitivity. And so there's ways that I think you can work with those sensitivities to still make some positive actions.
Yeah, I feel like in Alberta, we get a different climate-related tragedy every year, right? Whether it's fires in the north or flooding in the south or,
hail and extreme heat and wildfire and we've got them all. And so, they happen every year. They happen to us today. And it seems much more tangible, I think, than maybe people think. So when you start talking about it it seems more relatable, right? Like, hey, we're not talking about some giant problem here. We're actually talking about your assets will be closed because there's a wildfire. Your road to your community will not be usable. Right, your ice road, it's not going to be icy enough. It's not going to be cold enough for your ice roads, right? These are real problems that you're starting to see today. So, can we have a discussion about what might you do about those problems and what can we help you with? So, making it very relatable is always very helpful as well, too. And in a pragmatic sense that you can do something about it, right? Like the outcome of this isn't just to be negative that there's nothing to do, but the outcome of this is really to start to make some tangible plans and actually put something in place where you can see what it is, what the impact is, and how you can move forward.
I'll put you on the spot here. Is there a project that you want to tell me about that, we did something unique or interesting?
Yeah, so I think one of the kind of the neatest projects we've worked on recently has been the Parks Canada sort of condition assessments. So we've done these 2 years in a row now. I was just joining AE for the first round, but I was project manager for the second round for the 2023 assessments. And so between the two, we've assessed about 1,000 of Parks Canada's assets. From coast to coast to coast, they own about 18,000 assets at least. So not a huge number, but a decent start.
What would fall under that assets list?
So again, this is kind of the interesting part. So they own all kinds of things. So if you can imagine that it exists in Canada, they almost own it. So they've got a huge number of buildings. So you can imagine the visitor centers that you go to at a park, the public washrooms that you use, the campground cook shelters. They've got ward and patrol cabins in the backcountry that are multi-day hikes to get into. They've got water and wastewater treatment facilities. They've got roads. They own the Trans-Canada Highway when it goes through a park. In Ontario and Quebec, they own, they call them marine assets, but they own a series of locks and dams for the Rideau Canal, the Trent-Severn canals as well too. And then they own a whole series of dams all through Ontario that control all the waterway that go into that. And just docks and wharves and national parks on lakes and things wherever else you go. Bridges, trails, campgrounds. They own almost all national historic plaques in all over the place. They have a world.
Does that include like the castles and stuff?
Yeah, they own the fortification. So they've got fortifications, the Quebec City fortifications, and military forts all over the country, and they own a World War II destroyer that's still floating in Ontario. So they own a huge, diverse portfolio of assets. And so this project was to sort of assess them. So we actually did assess the World War II destroyer. So assess the condition of them, come up with a 20-year, forecast of investments. Unique to this as well too is we've looked at climate risks. So we've looked at the vulnerabilities of all of those assets and all those unique areas. And again, the geographic spread of those assets was made this really challenging because they were in all the parts of Canada. We assessed things from every one of the 3 coastlines that Canada has. We had assets there and everywhere in between. So a huge amount of climate risk assessment. We looked at greenhouse gas and energy reduction strategies for all those assets. We looked at sort of code requirements. We identified deficiencies and repair actions. So we've done a huge amount of work on all those assets as well too. That's also led to us helping develop Parks Canada's sort of nationwide maintenance strategy and plan. So we've done some work sort of modeling for all these different sorts of assets. What does a typical maintenance plan look like? What are mandatory activities that you must do? What are high, medium, and low priority activities that you must do? How much do those cost? How much does it cost to fix a boiler here in Calgary? How much does it cost to fix a boiler in Inuvik or Halifax or wherever else? And how does that change? How does it affect the cost when you can drive to it? How do you affect the cost when you have to take a helicopter to go fix it? So to look at all those nuances, we looked at just the operating environment as well too for Parks Canada. So, if you think about Banff, that's right here by Calgary, huge tourist destination, right? Expensive to get contractors out there, but it's relatively close to Calgary, so people will drive out for the day. How does that differ, and how do you contract things differently, in the north where it's extremely remote? Or how do you do that differently in Ontario or Quebec? How do you contract differently if you're trying to find masons that know how to work on a 400-year-old fort versus something else? And so we helped develop, so using these asset conditions as a base, we looked at all of their asset base across the country, developed these maintenance plans, developed these contracting strategies for how they might actually start to attack this maintenance in a more sustainable way. So it was just, I think, an incredibly unique project, challenging project. And again, it was interesting from the fact that it was integrated with climate, it was integrated with mitigation and adaptation actions. It was integrated with all these different sort of streams or work areas that we work in. And it was all together in one. And it was just a really cool project. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around just that diversity of things. Certainly when I go to a national park, I don't think, oh, somebody's got to maintain this.
Well, maybe we'll turn you into an asset manager now. I'll tell you, it ruins going places for you, because when I walk into a building, I can't walk past a fire extinguisher without checking that somebody's maintaining it, or when there's dirty things in a building, I'm looking at the consequences of that. So as you go down your asset management journey, I'll tell anybody interested in it, it just ruins going places for you, because that's all you think about then.
So we talked about some unusual assets. I spoke recently with Twyla Kowalczyk about a range of things for this podcast. And of course, she is also in the Strategic Advisory Services group here at AE. We briefly touched on the value of natural assets, and I wonder if you can tell me a bit about how we approach that aspect of the field. I should mention for our listeners that when we're talking about natural assets, it's things like the trees and the wetlands, the natural world within the purview of a given organization.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's maybe a little newer. People are really starting to recognize or understand that there's some value in them. And again, it's an interesting and challenging field to start to go into, right? But when you're looking at natural assets, they're not exactly free, but they are often quite cost effective when compared to engineered assets, especially when you're looking at what should or shouldn't you do. So, you asked me earlier about the do nothing. And often a do nothing is, you could look at it as, well, maintaining a natural asset then, right? Do we actually need to build a new thing here and remove potentially a new or an existing natural asset? Or should we replace it? How can they work in concert? And so, you can start to think about them in a way. They're sort of like purely natural assets that are sort of untouched and they just are natural. You can start to think about it too in ways of maybe modifying or slightly engineering them without totally replacing them, right? So, I come from a background of sort of parks and recreation, right, and facilities. And so if you think about a park, you're really at a park to enjoy a natural asset, right? You're not there because they have an excellent trail. The trail maybe facilitates it, but you're really there to enjoy a little bit of a natural asset, right? And then, that's just from an enjoyment perspective, but then you can take a look at the benefits. Well, it's probably helping you manage storm runoff, and it's giving you a cool area to go when you're faced with something like extreme heat. And, I look at it too. If I'm getting a recreation benefit from a park that somebody paved a trail through and otherwise they're just maintaining, that's significantly cheaper than trying to build big, giant, fancy recreation centers to replace all of that use, right? And so, from my experience there, natural assets are incredibly affordable. And, the same with water, wastewater, and storm management. They filter things, they buffer storm water and things like that. And so there's a huge value to them when they work properly, when you understand the value of them. And so, starting to incorporate that into your planning, I think, is an interesting exercise. Lots of organizations try to tackle it a little bit differently. But it's sort of recognizing that asset management now has moved out of maybe where it started as a financial reporting exercise where you don't own it, it's natural, so you don't report that, but actually you're getting value from it. You're gaining some value and it's helping you provide a service at a minimum. And so how you recognize the value of that service and that actually disrupting these natural assets might cost you much more in the long run than just leaving them or even maintaining and investing a little bit of maintenance money into them now front. So
Do you get the sense that people are thinking these are assets that kind of manage themselves? Like, as long as we don't chop down that tree, it's fine. As long as we don't pave that wetland, it's fine.
yeah, and I think I think that's an appropriate strategy too. People, and to a lot of extent, they are much easier to maintain. They are much more less resource intensive to maintain. But what you'll start to get is, as you develop this, if it's really critical, the service that natural asset is providing, it might not be appropriate to actually let it 100% manage itself. So if you are counting on it for some purpose, what would be an appropriate maintenance strategy? Should you go inspect it? Should you actually care about the health of your wetland then? Because if something happens and it does die out and you lose that value, you're forced to replace it then probably with some built infrastructure that you might not be planning for, you might not be budgeting for. So starting to recognize them, recognize the ones that are really critical to your service delivery, and then treat them like you would anything else. What's the appropriate way to maintain this? What's the appropriate way to renew this kind of an asset? And I think that can give you, as an organization, it gives you value, and it lets you, again, avoid when, things happen, development encroaches, and you start to erode some of the condition of those assets. Well, you can maybe see the value in it and protect them a little bit better when you can articulate it that way.
When you're doing an asset management plan, is that part of the pitch that, now we recognize that natural assets are a thing? So we expect you to be counting this alongside your pump stations and locks and cars. And
We've, I'd like it to be true, but I think it's still relatively new. And so you're starting to see a few organizations that are really recognizing it, but I think it's still in its infancy about how globally recognized it is, or how, everyone kind of recognizes those things. So I think there's more to come in that. I think you'll really start to see it start to pick up. But, in truth, so many organizations have a hard time with the built infrastructure that they own, let alone trying to incorporate natural assets. They don't even know how many pump stations or road they've got today, let alone trying to get the natural assets in. So I think it's an area that will grow in. I think it's a really valuable area to start to build out, but it's definitely new. You don't see a lot of organizations really diving into that just yet.
okay. So maybe to wrap things up here, I'll ask, what do you see as the biggest challenge or maybe threat, depending on your mood today, on the horizon for us generally that asset management can deal with?
I don't know if we have just one. I think it's we talked on climate change, and, obviously it's changing. We're faced with more extreme events more frequently, and that's going to have cost to us. So, I think that's a giant issue that we've got to figure out how to tackle, and to start tackling it. I think just the resource sensitivity. So I think, report after report looks at just how much infrastructure this country has. So if Canada kind of boomed through the 60s, and again, kind of through the 80s, you see a lot of public infrastructure get built in those time frames. And it's aging. It's all aging. And so we've got a price tag for all this stuff, and we're going to have to renew it. And there's obviously renewal going on now, but you start to see this cliff of investment coming where things really get old and really get to poor condition. And that's lining up with a changing climate that's getting worse, and it's actually going to be harder on all of our infrastructure. And we're also facing tighter resources, right? We don't have tons. Everything is more expensive to build and to buy. Meanwhile, you're not getting higher levels of investment from government as they're doing more and more. So you're really faced, if you own assets, with a lot of external pressures on the condition of those assets, and potentially even more limited resources to actually manage them even today. So, let alone worrying about 20 years from now, if it's going to be more exposed to climate change, you might not even have the money to maintain it today, let alone the future. So there's a lot of challenges. They're not necessarily new, but I think they're intensifying. And so I think organizations are really going to have to come to terms with what that means for them and what they can do. We might start to see a shift where we're actually getting reduced levels of service in areas because it's not sustainable to continue at the same sort of rate or at the same level. It might not be worse, but it might just be a shift in what we do receive and a shift in what those services are, something that is more sustainable.
Okay. I consider myself warned.
Leaving this off on a very gloomy note, I guess, right?
Well, this being a podcast, there's really a mandate that you have to either be talking about cocktail recipes or what it's like to be a working mother, or maybe some true crime facts. So is there any of those that you'd like to leave us with?
So I'll leave everyone here with a cocktail recipe. And so this is something, it's a drink I invented as a bartender. I call it a spring day. And so you pick up a bottle of Pimm's. So Pimm's Cup is a typical drink, but you get Pimm's, mix that with some soda or ginger ale. I like soda a little bit more. And then you want to muddle in some green apple and mint to that.
Wow.
And have that on a hot day, such as today in the summer. It's cool, refreshing, and delicious. So that's my spring day recipe.
Awesome. That is a good way to end this podcast.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan.
No, thanks for having me.
Okay.
A-Live, we're going to innovate. A-Live, gonna entertain and educate. A-Live, got a topic here to elevate. A-Live.